Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Ryan.
We are here doing something that, I never really thought we would be doing, which is giving our thoughts on a Babylon 5 reboot.
Announcement.
Yeah, but just the general concept of a Babylon 5 reboot. So, we are here, we're recording a day or two after the big news has come out, so for context sake, that is the situation, because by the time this comes out, there may be some new pieces of information or announcements or things that are more set in stone than where we are currently. So if there are some things that we talk about in this discussion that are kind of null and void, that is the state of things, because everything is so up in the air and unknown, and speculation is everywhere. And as a podcast, we usually like to have all of the pieces in front of us and then discuss it. But this is a special occasion. We're doing Babylon 5 for the main feed, and people have been really keen to know our thoughts, and it just feels easier, and people do want to hear it in an episode kind of context. So here we are to give our thoughts and general opinions on a Babylon 5 reboot and the news itself. So I want to first talk about what were your opinions, what was your feeling when you heard the news? Not about the concept or anything else. When you just heard JMS is making a Babylon 5 reboot, what was your feeling?
I was dubious, but excited because I trust JMS to be a good writer. And I was like, okay, I trust that he will do right by the show, by the characters, and that he will put the writing first.
Right.
So as long as he has a decent amount of control, and he should have a better budget than he started with, this will be interesting. I don't know how much I'm going to love it, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
My reaction was a big sigh. Just... and I was tired. That's how I felt. I felt so tired and drained when I heard that news. And that isn't because it's bad, but because the context of having heard the news is, in the past week or two, I have heard Scott Bakula saying that Quantum Leap is something that they're working towards bringing back, and I love Quantum Leap. And out of all of these shows, that's the one I want to come back. And then Russell T Davies coming back to Doctor Who, which brings me a lot of joy, but also anxiety and trepidation. And then Babylon 5 doing the same thing. The old creator coming back to do the show again in a new context. So I was just so drained from my brain clicking into gear with all of these big pieces of news and information and stuff happening in the sci-fi world, and in the sci-fi world that I grew up with, as well as just Star Trek in general. Star Trek in general, just every day it feels like we're getting some new piece of information about, like, here's this show and here's this cast member, and oh my god. And it's kind of anxiety-inducing in a lot of ways, because these are shows that I love and are a huge part of my media obsession. I am a big fan of Babylon 5. I am a big fan of Quantum Leap, a big fan of Doctor Who, a big fan of Star Trek. All of these things were formative in my youth, and I've seen them grow and change, whether they kept going as I grew up or me rewatching them and revisiting them when I've grown up. And so to have all three of these have either been confirmed or have the potential to come back in some way that I'm familiar with them or something or other, it made me tired. I was just, oh my god, this is This is so much to think about.
So it just overwhelmed you a little bit because of the cumulative effect of all of these announcements or pre-announcement sort of things.
And us doing our Babylon 5 coverage. Because us going through Babylon 5 one episode at a time has been a really joyous experience, and it's been great to engage with Babylon 5 fans, new and old. But now there's this feeling of the marketing and business side of it lurching with a new one coming in. Oh, we've got to talk about this. We've got to read these things. We've got to keep in touch of this. When we started this, obviously we didn't know there was going to be a new B5 thing. We just did it because we wanted to do it after doing Discovery. We needed a palate cleanser, and it's a show we like. It's great that the remasters came out, so newbies are here as well, but we just like the show, and now there's this element, too, of now there's going to be a new thing. Are we going to be a podcast that's going to discuss these new things all that much, or are we not going to do it? Are we going to be, and people are going to be listening and wanting to know, are you guys who are big lovers of the show, are you going to be for this or against this, or where's your opinion? And it's like overwhelming, yeah, and tiring. I was just like, oh my god.
I think I haven't gone down that path as much as you have.
No.
Partially because you think about the pod more in that way than I do. Because I have that luxury because you handle more of the back end stuff than I do. Like, I handle more of the back end stuff when it comes to our Patreon. And then when I actually read the tweets, it's just like, it's in active development, which means that it's over a year away from being anything that we'll get details about, let alone be able to see. He hasn't finished writing the pilot at this stage.
And that may still not even be the case, because JMS has always, at least with B5, been very active in the process of creation. So whether he keeps that up or not this time around, I didn't really notice if he did that with Sense8 or not. But
well, it says that he's announced that he's going to be showrunner. He's writing the pilot, and it wouldn't really feel like Babylon 5 if he didn't write a lot of the scripts, because he wrote a ridiculous amount of the scripts as showrunner.
And if he's coming back,
he's
coming back.
I think it also said somewhere that he's listed as a producer as well, which gives him even more control.
As he would be. But yeah, I was overwhelmed with a lot of feelings. One of the things that I worry about with this, and I want to talk about the positives first, but just a minor thing to worry with all three of those pieces of news, and then let's say 4 with Star Trek as well. I want sci-fi, but I would like new sci-fi, and not new in terms of we're rehashing, we're recontextualizing, reconstructing, redoing old stuff. I do want new sci-fi that generates this kind of enthusiasm. And I'm glad that this is generating enthusiasm, because as B5 fans, the benefit to this, if it does materialize, and if it's good or if it's bad, is more people will be aware of Babylon 5's existence and maybe check out the old show. Maybe.
Yeah, but for each positive with this thing, there is a flip side, because we do not know how this is going to pan out. Yeah. Like I said, I trust JMS to do the best that he can, but reading over things, people are like, will this ruin the legacy of B5?
B5 ruined its own legacy a couple of times because of stuff like the murder that was Crusade, because of the network there, or whatever the fuck the Legend of the Rangers was supposed to be, and the Lost Tales. So it's not as if Babylon 5 is holy sacred ground, and that
not
JMS
immaculate.
No, and JMS is, and the 5th season as well. And it's not like JMS is this truly perfect writer that everything he does is divine in Babylon 5, let alone his own work. But let's reel it back for a second, because I'm feeling us tensing up. I want to hear from you what you're looking forward to and the positives of this being a thing that could happen.
I really like that he made it very clear that they're not going back. They're not trying to recapture what happened with the original series and using that imagery of, like, you can't step in the same river twice.
Yeah. And that's what he's saying according to his tweets, is he modeled it in a way of saying, like, Westworld and Battlestar Galactica, in which there's going to be many elements that you know from the original, but they're going to be spun in a new way, and there's going to be lots of new stuff as well.
Yeah, because I don't want to revisit the world and have those characters changed or their stories changed. Like, I don't want to get Delenn in between, like, when she just reappears on that new show and when Sheridan has disappeared, and to be like, oh!
You just don't want the same direct story beats.
No, and I don't, what I mean by what I just said more so is I don't want them to go in and fill in gaps that don't need to be filled in.
Yes.
Like, I don't need to see Delenn working with the Rangers. I don't feel like I really need to see Admiral Ivanova.
Yeah.
Like, but from Claudia Christian's tweet, it sounds like she's pretty sure that she's going to be in the show.
Whether she's Ivanova, though.
Yeah, whether she's Ivanova or not.
She most likely won't be, right? But that's...
Yeah,
they're going to be involved in some way.
She made a statement about, like, going to be speaking the dialogue again, and that they're excited by that idea. So that seems somewhat concrete.
Well, what are some other kind of positive aspects of this and things you're looking forward to that aren't just things that you're hoping or not wanting that it will do? Like what you're kind of talking about there is still like, I'm glad that it hopefully won't do the thing that I don't want it to do. But like, what do you think? Like, what are the things that you're hoping for out of this and that kind of stuff?
I really like that he, JMS, commented on how weirdly spot on some things in the original B5 are, and that he's like, I'm not going to do that again, and I'm going to see if I can do it again for the future. I'm going to try and be prescient for the future and keep looking forward. And I really like that idea because for me, it even makes it more clear that he's not trying to recapture or just redo what he did, but just trying to write good sci-fi stories.
Yes, that's what I'm looking forward to, is good sci-fi stories. That's the minimum. Yeah. That's the minimum I want, is a good sci-fi story. I want to think about ideas philosophically through the medium of television and through the genre of science fiction. They don't have to be the same ideological ideas that were presented in the first B5.
No.
But I would like to actually be able to think when I'm watching a show rather than feel like... And I want to feel stuff too, but like I do want to have an ounce of intellectualism in my sci-fi, unlike with Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to the idea of that being a possibility again, because that's something we've been enjoying in Babylon 5 in our rewatches. Lots of these things that get you thinking and get us talking in intellectual manners that maybe we wouldn't have thought about if we just watched them and moved on. Like with episode like we did, we got coming up like Believers. Like that episode got us talking quite a bit. And so I am looking forward to just good sci-fi stories. We're not going to get TKO again, which is a big disappointment.
God, I hope not.
Which is a big disappointment. I would really love if we got a TKO episode again. I am also looking forward to... a good ensemble cast-driven science fiction show. I hope that JMS does not forget about the importance of character dynamics and interplay, because that is what I come to B5 for a lot as well, is
and we do get
ensemble
that
of characters.
Sense8.
We did get that in Sense8. We did, and I'm not saying that he can't, but I just want to make sure he doesn't...
Yeah.
I just want to make sure to flag
like,
that.
that's another thing of, like, we have these more recent things that JMS has made, namely Sense8.
Yeah.
That give me more of a sense of security of he can do this again.
Yeah.
Because he's done this in a completely different context with Sense8. Even though, like, one of the major issues with Sense8 is the studio interference.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you can't stop that. Like, he responded to one tweet being like, can you make sure that all of the seasons are greenlit, like with Babylon 5? And he's like,
I didn't have that ability
he's
before.
Like, they weren't. We had to fight for every single season. And it's even more funny when you're aware that they had to film the finale when they were filming the end of season 4, because they were so unsure that they were going to get picked up for season 5. They wanted to have that in the can in case they needed it.
With an ensemble cast, and this being modern television, right, it's got a shorter amount of episodes than the original run, all of that. What I like about an ensemble of characters is the diversity of characters, thus a diversity of stories, thus a diversity of themes that you can explore in your show. I am looking forward to that being something presented, because we have had issues with that in a lot of modern sci-fi shows, not just Star Trek Discovery, but I have had that as an issue with the Orville sometimes. I have had an issue with Killjoys with that sometimes, and I hope that JMS hits that chord again as strongly as he did in the past.
And it'll be really interesting to see how he interweaves that in the world of Babylon 5, because those are issues and ideas and aspects of just characters being who they are that he really likes to weave in, and he's going to have more flexibility to bring those aspects in. Like, I saw somebody like being disparaging, like, oh, like, there's gonna be SJW bullshit in this show, and somebody's like, oh, there's gonna be LGBTQ aliens, and I was like, yes!
Yeah, I
was like, yes, I want that.
Of course. With the character stuff, say, obviously if this is going to be, and again, there's lots of stuff up in the air, and this may change by the time this comes out, but if this is going to be the characters we knew and the recast, I am okay with some characters not being here for the sake of the show not feeling too cluttered, because again, television has changed, the landscape has changed.
But you want Keffa back, right?
Of course, as the main guy. Of course, him and Byron. So I do mean that, like, as much as I love having characters like Zach Allen, and I really do love Zach Allen, if you need to eject those characters for the sake of the show and the story, then that is okay by me. Because this is the most important thing, is if you're going to be doing a new thing with Babylon 5, you will have to ride that, the line will have to be really trod upon of when and when not to cross over, of being beholden to the old material and to the audience. And this is one of those aspects that I think needs to be firm, is we don't want to be drowned in characters, because that's what happened with Star Trek Discovery. That's what happened with Final Space. There's too many characters, and it's that classic, no one's getting fed enough material, and thus all the characters feel underbaked in a lot of those shows, or fighting for time. Babylon 5 even struggled with that back in its heyday. There's so many episodes without Talia Winters, to the point in which Talia Winters, by default, is one of the weakest characters because we didn't spend a lot of time with her.
Yep.
That is something that I hope is understood, because that's what I loved about Sense8, for instance. We mainly focused on our 8 characters and the 1 or 2 companions they had, and although that's a large cast of characters, the way that show was broken up
balanced it.
It balanced it out, and so that is something, when it comes to that, I'm okay with in terms of change. If the show does not need to have Zach Allen, or to have Natoth, or to have some of these characters that I do love in them, that's okay if you do give the ones that are there substance to them. That's important. One of the things I'm also really looking forward to is space battles.
Yeah.
Babylon 5, although newcomers and, us oldies too, looking back, the CG isn't great, of course, but as a child, I loved the space battles, and I still do, because of how inventive they were, and they didn't puss out like Star Trek. They would show you the battles, they would show you interesting military tactics and use the 3 dimensions, and I'm hoping with the ability to have a little bit more of a budget, and with the advancements in CG, including in television, I'm really hoping to see some fun dogfights in space.
Oh, yeah. And, I think I mentioned this before, JMS wants to keep that spirit of innovation. And he specifically mentioned the CGI in his tweet. So I think that we're going to get that. It might not necessarily be those dogfights in every episode, or I think it'll be scattered throughout, but I think that there'll be lots of interesting things done with the CG. And I know our good friend Sparks will come back.
Sparks that shoot out of the wall? Yeah, I hope they come back. I'm also looking forward to practical sets.
Yes, I hope so.
I hope we get lots of fun practical sets. Oh, and alien makeup. I'm looking forward to really fun alien makeup designs, because Babylon 5 was always very strong with that, even though it had less of a budget than Star Trek. And I imagine, of course, this will have less of a budget than Discovery. Of course, Discovery is like a fucking movie every episode. But I hope that they continue on coming up with creative but practical alien designs, because some of my favorite alien designs makeup-wise are in Babylon 5, and I really hope they really utilize that. And one of the last points I want to make before chucking it over to you some more is, and I don't know if it's a Wachowski thing, and I think it may be, just from my limited relationship with JMS after Babylon 5, is I hope he leans into, and this show leans into, visual storytelling far more than the dialogue, because as I love rewatching Babylon 5, but it's a very talky show, and that's okay because the dialogue's usually great. But I think to get with the times, I think it's okay to lean into the visual medium far more. That was one of the strengths of Sense8, was it knew when to be quiet sometimes and let the visuals and the filmmaking tell the story as well.
I think that that's something that JMS has developed over time, especially through the interactions with other creators like the Wachowskis, is that sense of, does this need to be said?
Yeah, rather than can this be shown creatively? Yeah,
because I think that's shifted as JMS has worked on a lot of different projects as well, because at his core, he is a writer. So his tendency is towards dialogue. Yeah. But I think as he's gotten older and worked with other people, he's developed more of a sense of, how can I write this without words as well as using the dialogue?
The most powerful stuff in B5 is often wordless. The iconic Londo's reaction to the bombing of Narn. You don't need a lot of dialogue. It's just visuals and his face, and that's all you need. And same with Londo looking back on all of his choices he made in the end of Season 5. There's lots of silent moments in Babylon 5, but I'm hoping that now with also a budget, we can get filmmaking to really play around with that. Like, Better Call Saul is a very talkative show as well, but it also is very creative with its camera work and visuals, and sometimes there's just whole sequences without dialogue. I'll always remember there's a discussion they had in one of their podcasts for Better Call Saul in which there was a whole comedic date scene that he was on, Jimmy McGill was on, but in the editing process they realized this didn't need to be heard. All they needed was music and fades and stuff. And it's one of the more memorable sequences in that season in particular.
And lots of B5 episodes are duds because of the direction.
Oh, yeah. I hope that even though it's a CW and I don't know what kind of catalogue of directors they get there, I hope that the direction can be a little bit more creative like it was in later seasons of Babylon 5. Although people don't love Season 5 of Babylon 5, there was some really, really creative visual choices done by directors in B5. Like Mira Furlan's husband directed a singular episode of Babylon 5, and I think it's one of the best directed episodes. So I hope they know how to do that. You mentioned it. The LGBTQ plus themes that were very drowned out in the original run of the show is something that you're keen on seeing.
Yep.
Let's talk about that. You go first. Tell us about what you're wanting from that or hoping to get.
I'm just hoping to get good, valid, real, concrete representation. Because like the show had kind of soft representation and like
for that stuff,
yeah, like with Ivanova,
and Talia,
and Talia's sexualities, the idea of Delenn being trans that gets dropped.
Yeah, that was at least a conceptual idea.
Yeah, and I just want it to be there, but not for it to be what the character is about. Like, it's not like
that's the defining character trait.
That's that character, and it's just like, oh, well, that's the only thing that they do. That's the only thing that they talk about. That's the only reason why they're on the show.
You don't have to say Hugh Culber over and over and over again like that, Rachel. You don't have to say Adira over and over and over again like that, Rachel, from Star Trek Discovery, not Adira from Babylon 5. You don't have to keep saying those names over and over again to communicate that point. Jeez, Rachel, it was subtext there. But I agree.
Sorry. Gray.
17 is missing. So I completely agree. One of the things that I liked about B5 that I never thought about until I do believe, and this may be my memory filling in some gaps, but Richard Biggs, or at least JMS, talking about how Dr. Franklin was never the black guy on the show. That never was a part of his character. He just is. And that is what we're hoping for in ways with if they do lean into representation. Like, if Delenn is a trans character, of course you want that to be a part of the story. If they're going to do a whole thing of them or her, whatever, transforming, you want it to be done in a way that is obviously speaking to something, just like Sense8 did with trans issues in that story as well. But if Ivanova is bisexual or gay outright, or Talia, you don't want them to be, I am just the gay character on the show. I'm gay and that's it. You want more nuances to them. You don't want it to be their trait and that's it. And you just point and go, they're the gay character of the show. They're the token. They're the representation marker. You want naturalism in there. You just want it to be. I want the characters to be written in the show, not representation written into the show. If that makes sense? Yeah, you don't want it to feel grandstanding.
No.
and to feel sloppy like Discovery does it. I don't want, and the CW is guilty of this, queer baiting. Don't do that shit, JMS. Just don't do that shit.
Yeah.
Just if the show is going to explore these or have that, just do it. And I think he would, because obviously back in the 1990s, he had to do that. He had to subtly put it in there because of what network he was on and of the times, and also his lacking knowledge of how to write these things himself as a writer. Nowadays, I don't think he would be like that because he was stopped before. Now he can do it. Do it. Just fucking do it. If you're going to do it, do it. Don't do some Hannibal bullshit where you start queer baiting. Do what you did on Sense8 and open up with a dildo.
And
covered
also,
in cum.
And also on the swing side of that, don't lean too heavy into it and just make every character something representation just because you can. Like, if it makes sense for them and it works out that way, and everybody in the ensemble is, like, neurodivergent or, like, differently abled or on the LGBTQ spectrum, then that's fine. But some shows that are like, we're representing, force everybody into a box.
You don't want Q-Force.
No, I don't want Q-Force.
I don't want Q-Force the B5 version. What else are you excited about by this, or thinking that there's potential to be done better, or to be done new, or just what are you looking forward to?
Oh, I don't know. Like, there's one particular quote that I wanted to read out from JMS's tweets, because this one in particular gave me a lot of hope as, like, okay, I feel like this is happening for the right reasons and that there is creatively structure and integrity behind this happening, which I'm just going to read it out in full. So, true. But for me, it's part of the compact with the audience. If they know that everything's there because it means something, that it's not just forgotten the next day, and there won't be any underground shifts, cheats, or feints, they can relax and enjoy the story.
Yeah.
And that made me go, okay, it's going to be solid, and I'm going to need to trust and just be ready to explore with the new show and not be like, oh, I want it to be this way, or, oh, that's not what I wanted. To be like, okay, this is a new story in a world that I know. Yeah,
I agree. One of the things that I found very compelling about reading, or listening, I should say, to his JMS's autobiography is how much he has come to terms with mental health issues in his own life, whether it be from people around him or his own issues that he has had. And I would love to see those aspects explored more in this run of the show, because one of the things that's been really hitting me when rewatching the first season is Sinclair's PTSD and how it's handled, but it's handled very quietly. And I'm not saying that he needs to make it the front and center if he does this show, but I think there's more of a personal clarity he has about that side rather than a narrative clarity that I think that he could bring into the show and show us that high-ranking professional captain commander types or your protagonists of your show could actually suffer from mental health issues and still be heroes, because that's a great message. It's one of the things that I love about Sinclair is even though he has mental health issues, he's still a competent character.
He's not a failure because he has issues with his mental health. And that dealing with those makes him stronger and makes him a better commander as well.
And understandable and relatable to the audience.
Yeah,
and
which is really empowering for myself and a lot of other people who watch B5.
This is an obvious thing. JMS and Babylon 5 and all of his work, I would say, knows this, but it's obvious to state I'm looking forward to flawed, fucked up, selfish, arrogant characters.
Yes.
That are like that on purpose, and the show is aware of that about them. Not fucking Discovery or Doctor Who, or even, again, Final Space, to throw that one under the bus, in which they use it for jokes. I would love, like, Franklin, for instance. We talk about in our upcoming episode on Believers that one of the things we love about Franklin is his flaws and arrogance as a character, and how he has to go through hellish torment to overcome those and to recognize those. And I'm looking forward to flawed, fucked up characters like a Londo type or a Jakar type, as long as it keeps a message about that. As long as there's a reason narratively and thematically you're going to have that. I don't want them just to be pricks for the sake of being pricks, because then you have nothing to enjoy.
Said no cheats.
No cheats. No cheats there. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm trusting him on his word.
And I know this may be a surprise. It's a surprise to me, even. And it's not been his strong suit in the past with B5. Maybe it's improved. But I want some romance. I want some cute dates. I want to see some love in the show. I want to see characters smooch. I want to see characters give each other flowers. I want to see characters... I want to see the Catherine Sakai-Sinclair relationship as a full-fledged relationship in the show. Like, that type of relationship. I want to see that fully fledged in a way where I want to see a mature couple who's lived in. I want to see blossoming relationships romantically. I want to see the pitfalls of long-term relationships or of new relationships. I want to see that stuff, as well as the political wheeling and dealing and empires toppling and spaceships shooting at each other. I want a bit of love. I want a little smoochy. A little bit of
cutie.
Love saves the day in the end type of deal. I want a little bit of that. Yeah, sure. Sure, I want that. As well as Londo's dicks. Better bring the dicks back. Or else canceling the show.
Do you want to see the full dicks? Do you want to see...
Well, we kind of did.
Them?
We did.
We see like the one.
No, we see all six in Londo's heart attack episode when they open up his shirt and they wrapped around him. So we do get his full dicks.
But like we extended, like erect.
Give us via dicks. Just saying. Just saying. Now that's all the positives. I have said many a times on this podcast, on our discussion of Discovery, and in our Patreon episodes, I am not a huge lover or fan, and I'm usually opposed, if not always opposed, to dredging up these things and reanimating them and making them walk around. I have said in the past in our Patreon discussions that I do not need to revisit Babylon 5's world outside of this original material, because every time JMS has revisited this world after that original 5-season arc story, it has been shit, or disappointing, or subpar. The book he wrote, the short stories or whatever, the spin-off movies and Crusade, yes, there's reasons for why some of those are shit that were out of his control, but then there are none that we know of, and they were just shit. Lost Tales is shit. The Lost Tales sucked. And so, although talking very highly and positively, is this what I want? Do I want a Babylon 5 reboot? Not really.
No, but you're getting it.
No, we're getting it, and I want to embrace it, but my honest reaction is, I don't want that. I am okay with letting things be. some sci-fi fans really want more in this universe because the world is so cool. The world is great, but the story was told. Look at Star Wars. Star Wars is constantly trying to wring stuff out of that world, but maybe the stories were told. Or maybe there are more new stories to tell, but boy, have they failed a lot. And it becomes more of an embarrassment every day in a lot of ways. And I don't know. B5 is something I love dearly. I don't want to be old school, like, don't mess with it, because sure, do what you want, give us new stuff, explore things that you didn't get to do before, but thus far the track record of revisiting and reinvigorating this world after Sleeping in Light has been a shit show. It's just been a shit show to me. So I'm not thrilled with the idea of a reboot in general for most things, if I'm honest. I wasn't thrilled for a reboot of Doctor Who when it first came out, but then that swayed me. Even as a kid, I wasn't thrilled, but I was like, okay, let's see what it does. And same with Quantum Leap coming back. I'm not exactly 100% thrilled because I know it won't be what I want it to be, which is Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell going on adventures. I know it's not going to be that, but that's what I want it to be. Well, with B5, I don't want any more. I was happy with where it was, but people really want that stuff. What is your opinion on revivals, reboots, reimaginations, dredging these things up or bringing these things back? Because you are different to me. How do you feel about it?
About specifically Babylon 5 or just in general?
Both. Talk about both. So go with B5 first. Go with in general first, and then how B5 relates or differentiates.
In general, I'm usually very dubious about reboots or like soft reboots or sequels. I'm always just a bit like, really? I'm sure that there's something that's new that needs to be told. And a lot of the time they don't think of something new. They just do the same thing again.
Or too different, like Picard.
And yeah, well, Picard's shit for a fuck ton of reasons. That being one of them. But with Babylon 5, I'm like, okay, it's been a while. I feel like there's something interesting that they can do here. Mm-hmm. And I'm reassured that they're saying something fresh is coming. But also, like, I'm hopeful, but I'm not gullible. Like, of course he's going to say that. Of course JMS is going to say that it's going to be fresh, it's going to be new, and he's going to do his best.
He said the same with Lost Tales.
Yeah, especially when it's this early on in development, where it's like, it's just all in his head. Like, he hasn't really shared any specifics because he doesn't have them to share, and or like contractually he can't explain anything.
And we don't know how much complete creative control he has and the limitations that the CW brings along for the ride, because it's the CW. The CW have a certain set of standards that may not be palatable for us B5 fans of yesteryear, but we don't know if that's being enforced upon him or if he's got full creative control in the way that we would want him to. But yeah.
But also, you need limits.
Oh yeah, you need the limits.
There. Okay, I'm gonna bring up Gilmore Girls.
I was actually gonna say Gilmore Girls revival show is an example of a reboot that you thought you wanted and then you got it.
Yes, and that was limited series, 4 long episodes, and the creators didn't have somebody to tell them no. And we got so much fucking bullshit in that series, and like people had problems with the character of Rory in the way that they dealt with Lorelai and Luke's relationship. But after a year in the life, everybody's just like,
it was fine.
What the fuck? Like, Rory was a bad person, but now she's that bad? And wow, was she always that entitled? And then you go back to the original show and you're like,
no.
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of?
Yeah, she was really a fucking brat a lot of the time, and very entitled and thinking that, and self-centered, like the universe revolves around me, because a lot of the time it fucking does. With that show.
That was also an issue where that was a continuation, and that's what the smart thing about this B5 reboot, to give it credit, is this is not a continuation, because as an outsider to Gilmore Girls, and there's many other examples we could go through, the Halloween series for movies, for instance, a cast member, or in Babylon 5's case, several, are no longer with us. And the parts that make the sum are gone. And with Gilmore Girls, you talked about it with me a lot. The dad not being in the show, like him having passed away, was a major component that was missing in that revival. And that they had to address it.
Yeah, they at least did that thing of, like, they worked that into the story.
Yeah.
But it was also frustrating
because they tried to replace him with Ray Wise.
Not so much that. But they didn't have an idea of what they wanted to do with that. They were just like, well, we can't leave him out of the story or recast him, so we have to make him die.
It was a concession.
Yeah.
Rather than an actual need. And that's why it's smart that this reboot isn't a continuation, because we have so many cast members that are no longer with us. And there's too many of them no longer with us, so it's implausible to try. But
I think it's going to take a lot if they have a new version of Jakar for me to accept that.
That is,
I think
the thing.
that like there are a lot of big hurdles that are gonna come with this as well.
Yeah, before we get into that kind of casting thing, I just want to clarify. I would be more excited if this was new characters, new adventures in the B5 world. But from my understanding, and again, everything's up in the air, it sounds like we're recasting the old characters and using some components of the old story. I'm sure it will still be different enough, but I am of that ilk of what Star Trek did, which is when Next Generation came around, it wasn't Kirk. Picard was different, and they became a better show once they stopped trying to emulate the 60s show.
Yeah.
DS9 was a good show because it wasn't trying to be the Next Generation. Voyager struggled with that problem, and Enterprise, I can't even be bothered to try and explain where Enterprise failed in a lot of ways. And with Discovery, I was super excited by Discovery, as everyone knows if you listen. But once the show started to become obsessed with the grander things of sucking itself by being like, she's Spock's sister and all of this stuff, it started to lose me. And then Picard. I would want, with my sci-fi show, to have new characters, new adventures, new themes, new stuff. Maybe in a familiar world that I know with B5. The casting thing. Now, again, up in the air. We don't know if it's going to be the case of the characters are all going to be there and they're all going to be recast by these things,
or if
it's
more
going to be
of a Simpsons style thing of like those characters that no longer have, like, the actors aren't with us anymore, they'll be retired.
Yeah, those characters. That's what I was going to say. Like, because JMS in his autobiography, in his tweets, in the convention things, has always had such a strong relationship, devotion, and love for the cast members. And the cast members that played those original characters had a real feeling of ownership of them because JMS kind of imbued the real-life people into the characters in lots of ways. And of course, they're actors. They don't own these roles. Other people can do these roles, but someone else being other than Andreas Katsoulis doing Jakar, it's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. Like I said, it will take a lot for me to accept a new Jakar.
My dream would be that those characters would be retired and they bring new characters to fill in their roles, but are different to Jakar. Like, Jakar is not in the show, but they have a Jakar, like a non-ambassador who's rivaling, and that kind of thing. Something like that, because he is
not trying to replace. That's I think that's our thing overall. We do not want this reboot to be trying to replace the original Babylon 5. We don't want them to redo the exact same storyline and the same cast. We want it to be like the 2020s version of Babylon 5.
Yeah, but and I worry that JMS, who's very critical of his own work, could fall into the trappings of creators tinkering with their own work because they think they can do it better.
Yeah.
And they've forgotten, because of time marching on and their own personalities having changed and their own sensibilities having changed, and that sense of, I'm older now, I've got more under my belt, I'm better than I was in the past. Tinkering with the thing to the point of forgetting what the thing was in the first place. Here we have a nice clock, and JMS in this has tinkered it, and now it's a shoe rack. I liked it when it was a clock. It was functional. It told me the time. And so I am worried that he could fall into that trapping with this. But this is, if they do the casting and they get someone as Jakar and they get someone as Delenn, we'll give those actors a chance. Because it's not on them. This is just the nature of the beast. And we will give the writing a chance. But it's going to be hard. We're going to have reservations. We're going to have judgments because those actors owned those roles so well. One of the things I don't like, and this is more a reaction to this news, and it makes me uneasy, and this isn't rational, but like one of the things that's really irked me is Mira Falan only passed away rather suddenly for us, not so suddenly for the cast and crew of B5, but in a really surprising manner, earlier this year. And it hasn't even been a year since she's passed away, and people are already pitching who the new Delenn will be. And people are already pitching how they could make Delenn better. And people are already pitching, basically, well, here's the new Delenn. And I don't know. It just feels so weird to me because she was one of the big cast members, and she's no longer with us, and she was a fan favorite. Everyone loved her at the convention. She seemed very nice. She was one of the best actresses in the show. It's just weird to me. And I don't know if it's that thing of it feels like it's too soon. That's just the nature of business as well. Like, this is just how things are going to roll, and by the time they do casting, more time will have passed. But it does make my skin crawl, being on the internet and seeing people talk about how much better Delenn could be as a character now, and how many cool actresses could be this character. And it's just, I don't know, it weirds me out because it was only, a few months back that everyone in the B5 community was mourning the loss of one of the essential cast members. And then thrilled that the HD remasters came along so we could all view this cast member's amazing work along with the other ones who have passed away. Like, when we were starting our podcast, a part of us watching this too was to really admire Mira Falan's performance, because that is a part of our rewatch experiences. There's certain cast members, certain characters, whether it be because the cast members have passed away or we are really drawn to that character this time on the watch. We look at certain characters and certain cast members specifically when we're rewatching it to admire the work being done, whether it's in the script or the acting. It just makes me feel weird just talking about casting all these people, and especially Mira Falan, Delenn, it's just odd. It's not, completely fair on JMS. It's a lot on his shoulders, but, like, it is something of a reaction to this news that just doesn't sit well with me. That's what I'll say. Other than that, there's just the reservation of it's the CW. People are really up in arms about it being the CW. As non-Americans, as just Australians, we don't get the CW, really.
No, we don't get the pure CW, but we do see the CW effect.
Yeah, and the CW has a reputation for low quality, and that does fill me with dread, but I don't care. Because Babylon 5 lived on networks that weren't necessarily reputable enough either.
No.
So I don't think it matters, honestly. And if he is allowed to have a bit more of a budget than he did back in the day, fuck it. He'll be fine. And as we've stated many times, Babylon 5's lower budget has never been an issue for us. As long as the stories and the characters and the themes are coherent, as well as the writing, it doesn't matter if the special effects look like a PlayStation 1. It doesn't matter if you can see the seams of the makeup or the cracks in the set. As long as the writing and the characters and the acting are good, then it doesn't fucking matter that it's on the CW.
Because you're caught up in it.
Yeah, and there are some shows that I have heard on the CW that aren't too bad. Like, people do like Legends of Tomorrow. I've never watched it, but I don't care that it's on the CW. But it does feel like a monkey's paw situation. It's like, you want a Babylon 5 show and everyone's thinking HBO Max, of course, CW, and you're like, ugh. It is one of those things where you hear CW and you react because the CW also
has a reputation that is well earned.
Low quality. It's the place of Riverdale. Are we going to have teen angst, romance, trauma bullshit in Babylon 5? I don't think we are, but the CW has that brand.
The main reservation that I have with the CW attachment is that, for me at least, part of its reputation is that it makes shows go on longer than they need to go on. And I do not want that to happen to Babylon 5.
Oh, well, he'll get his 5-season arc, because they always go for 5 seasons and more on CW. But yeah, I worry. Here's something too that I haven't thought about. Are you at all interested, if this is a success, if it's good quality and a success, are you wanting a television universe like how the Marvel things do it, or how their DC shows do it, or how TV shows and all these shows want to do? Do you want, or how they tried to do with B5, with Crusade and with Legends of the Rangers? Are you wanting there to be a B5 show and then separated to a B5 show, there's a Rangers show, and then, like, do you want B5 to be what Star Trek was in the 90s?
At the moment, I say no. I say no because, like, that's shooting for the stars.
Mm-hmm. But it's the business.
It is, and I want it to be good.
Yeah, it's good.
I want it to be good, and I don't know if they can juggle that much and make it all good.
No. I think that's it for the B5 reboots. I don't think there's much else to say. There's lots of disparate elements, lots of rumors, lots of hearsay, lots of things going in the works, but those are the main kind of thoughts. Mm-hmm. I'm excited, and I'm... The best way
trepidatious.
The best way I described it on Twitter is Lanier and Veer talking about their ambassadors and just saying... It makes them nervous. I'm very nervous. Yeah. And that's how I feel. I feel nervous in both. I'm excited, and I'm afraid that they're going to fuck it up. I'm excited that they're going to do well, and I'm afraid they're going to fuck it up. But my golden rule is, if it's done well, we get a good sci-fi show to watch. Mm-hmm. If it's done bad, we still have the old sci-fi show, but now more people will be aware of its name. and maybe check it out. I hold that with a grain of salt because everyone has said that to me about those Star Trek movies. And barely anyone I fucking know ever checked out the Star Trek shows. Barely anyone I ever know actually checked out those fucking Star Trek shows. But it does happen. So that is a benefit.
That is. Okay. Well, I think that there's one more important thing that we need to note.
Yes.
No one escapes the spoo.
Oh, no. He's got to bring back the spoo.
No, he said that.
He will bring back the spoo. Good.
No, like, no one escapes the spoo is a quote from his Twitter.
Awesome. I have an email here. We don't do emails on Our Thoughts On, but we got an email that I thought would be good for this discussion because it's a lot about technical, like TV, landscapey stuff. So I thought we'll talk about it here instead of waiting a couple of weeks for when our episode would come out, since we're, recording this kind of rather on the fly. So I have an email from our good friend Alan, who was in our Death Walker episode discussion. He was from Ptsd Television Podcast. He has an email for us that reads, the title is Babylon 5 and What We Want from Sci-Fi. Oh, Alan, you sent this email before the reboot news, so you have a lot of omniscience here. So he writes...
Maybe he's a JMS patron, because they kind of got a
sneaky...
They got a heads up that big news was coming.
Yeah, so Alan writes, Happy Yum Rachel and Ryan. Thank you. Oh, that's something. Do you want them to have a character say Yum Yum inextricably in the show? I do. And I want it to be Nograth. Just saying. So Alan says, and I'll read the full email out and then we will talk about the questions in it. Just wanted to shoot an email to say that I loved hearing the Chats Kid on the pod. That's them. Good job, Alan. I liked hearing it too. They brought a really fun and sharp insight to the Death Walker discussion. My main question this week is about how B5 matches up to modern sci-fi television. While The Expanse is generally considered the most successful currently airing science fiction series, I'm noticing less and less competition. What do you think it was about the 80s and 90s that gave us such good sci-fi? And why aren't more TV networks today buying shows like B5? Oh, the CW has an answer for that. Because they just bought B5. No, they already had it in a way because it's part of Warner Brothers. I think nerds are very quick to obsess over new exciting properties. Are you sure, Alan? They seem to be obsessed over the old ones. But it seems like there is much less sci-fi on TV these days. Is it the streaming environment or our emphasis on quick disposable television not making room for 5-season arc kind of shows? Or is it the high budget associated with these shows? I always miss B5 and I wish dearly to have a show like it to watch week by week as it airs, but nothing so far has filled that hole. Much love to you both and be well, Alan. Alan, well, they're going to fill that hole real soon. So there's a lot to unpack there. Alan's asking a lot of questions. In a way, this reboot kind of negates some of them or kind of answers them maybe one day. But let's talk about the question of the week, which is about how B5 matches up to modern sci-fi television. How modern sci-fi television matches up to what B5 was doing back in the day. Right?
Yeah.
B5 had a plan. I think that's the big difference.
Yes.
It's not adapting something.
Nope.
And it has a clear plan. Now, there are shows with plans, like Sense8 obviously had a plan, and same with the OA had a plan. But I think when it came to the 80s and 90s, the sci-fi genre was the market because of, and I don't mean to generalize, there's lots of contributing factors, but Star Wars was a big thing.
And trends are cyclical.
Because, hey, fantasy came back in fashion with Game of Thrones and all of that and that kind of thing. So it's not completely off the table. But back in the late 70s, we got Star Wars. And that became the marketable thing. So what happened? Star Trek was trying to make something and then they made the movie. And then we had all the Star Trek movies. So now we had two big sci-fi juggernauts that were then controlling the market, and everyone was trying to make their own. We got Battlestar Galactica, the obvious Star Wars ripoff, but it became its own thing. It gained its own personality. People loved it. Then you had shows like V, and then you had so many during the 80s and 90s, because TVs and film studios and networks were all trying to get in that market.
Sci-fi cash.
They were trying to get that cash, and it allowed creatives like JMS and like Gene Roddenberry and co. to come back with Star Trek. It allowed JMS with stuff like this, and it allowed so many people, even the X-Files, to come in with these weird genre shows and bring them in and fill up that quota. We want to have our Star Wars show, so here's Battlestar Galactica. We want to have our Star Trek show, so here's this, right? We want to have this. So in the 80s and 90s, and this is simplifying, there's lots of factors, but Star Wars was a big moneymaker and cultural impact, and it did affect things. Star Trek was affected. It came in and they made their movie. It wasn't trying to be Star Wars, but it did impact them making that movie and making several other movies after. And the competition between the two sci-fi juggernauts, Star Wars, Star Trek, and thus that spawned all of these things. I mean, it would be blind not to say that Babylon 5 is clearly Star Trek inspired in lots of ways. We know that it's not DS9 inspired because we understand that, but I think in the 80s and 90s, there was just this juggernaut rolling forward of those things happening that created an interest in those. And with Star Trek coming back on television, Rachel, it cornered the market. There was no big sci-fi shows that even came close to dominating TV like it did back then. You had B5, but it was an underdog. Barely any people have seen it. That's why it's a relatively small fandom in the grand scheme of sci-fi TV. I mean, it's got its followers, as we can tell by our numbers, but, like, it's not Star Trek level. It's not that level, but it existed because Star Trek and several other things were able to exist on TV. Able to show that the genre brought in audiences.
Successful.
Yes, and that's when you get in the later part of the 90s and 2000s, we got tired. We had Star Trek for so long, and we had Babylon 5, and we had all these shows for a while, and the network started to want to meddle with them more. That's where you get the weirdness of Enterprise or the weirdness of Crusade, where the networks or the times were changing and things wanted to be rearranged because we have lived with this type of television being popular for quite some time.
Yep.
You know, it's one of those things. And I think one of the things to say here is that, you know, nerds obsess over new exciting properties. Do they? Do they really, though? Or do they obsess over new properties within the old? Because I am not going to paint too broad of a brush, but there's so many interesting science fiction shows and podcasts out there that get barely any spotlight from the community because they're too obsessed with new Star Trek or too obsessed with new Star Wars or too obsessed with a B5 reboot. The nostalgia is very strong. I've heard more people talk about how interesting the queer representation is in Doctor Who and not even talk about the OA at all, which is embarrassing because, you know, it's undersaturated, the new stuff, because the new stuff that's made from old stuff has that staying power. We watch it more because it's a thing I know, and it will hopefully recapture the thing I liked about it from my youth. Wouldn't you agree, Rachel?
Yep.
Like, what's a new sci-fi show that you've watched that isn't attached to some old thing?
I can't think of any.
Right? Yeah. But you know they exist.
Yeah. Like, when you were reading out the email and like it mentions the idea of like, is there just not new sci-fi? Is it just because like we don't pay enough attention? And I think that is part of it, because we are so saturated with media, and it takes less mental energy to watch something that you already know or you already have a connection to. It's more of a gamble to try something new.
And I think with these beloved sci-fi properties, we're seeing this with Star Trek, we're seeing this with Star Wars, we're seeing this a lot, is they corner the market because they're well known, and they amass the audiences of loyalty because they're prestige. They've been around for the beginning of time, it feels like. But they are far more corporatized and industrialized than stuff like Sense8 was, then stuff like the OA was, then stuff like Final Space was. These are no longer just sci-fi shows. They are properties. They are brands, and we have to have the show out so that this show is out every day of the year. Like, I lost my mind when I heard from my sister that, they're going to be a Marvel show every week for the year. And that made me sick to hear that. I felt sick hearing that. But that's the thing, and it grains these loyal fan bases. So new stuff like the OA I keep mentioning slips through the cracks in a lot of ways, because I don't agree that the nerds are very quick to obsess over new exciting things. They're obsessed with old things, and then when there's something like The Expanse, never forget The Expanse got cancelled, and it had to get brought back by someone else. And The Expanse is an adaptation of pre-existing material. Whether it follows it coherently or not, that brings in a fan base. The Expanse is not a wholly original series that came out of nowhere. It's not B5.
No.
B5 was new and fresh and came from the mind of one guy. The Expanse is from books. So there was a loyal fan base because books.
Yeah. There was already buy-in. And there's one particular thing that I want to bring up with that discussion, which is there are so many shows that are like, this sci-fi show you've been sleeping on. And that happened so fucking much with Sense8.
Yeah.
And we did that. We went, that looks pretty good. We like those creators. And we just didn't watch it.
Well, yeah, okay. So I disagree and agree with what you're saying. Like, with Sense8, I disagree with that because I had issues with it before I wanted to watch it. Like, I don't like the Wachowskis all that much, and I thought the marketing was very bland and boring and didn't tell me much. And, yeah, but I do agree.
Because they were trying to play it safe.
Yeah, and they weren't trying to tell you much.
Yeah.
And I think, Alan asks, is it the streaming environment and our emphasis on quick disposable TV not making room? No. I don't think so.
Quibi would have succeeded if it was.
No, I don't think so. I think people are invested in these long story arcs. Game of Thrones, yes, it shit the bed, but did it dominate? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And The Expanse is one of the ones heralded because it is doing these ongoing threads, from my understanding. And so I don't think it's that, but I do think the streaming format does bring issues. One of the issues, I think, and Rachel, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this, is why shows like Star Trek, The Next Generation, and Babylon 5 has a knowledge is there was less stuff on at the time. There was not 15 million networks on at the time trying to vie for us to watch them, and that's a part of the streaming format. There are sci-fi shows on streaming formats that I don't even know fucking exist that are on, and thus I don't know that. There's just so much more availability to watch stuff on.
Yeah.
There's so many different channels, so many different networks, so many different streaming services.
So much saturation.
And so that does, the streaming format and the evolution of TV, bring forth seasons upon seasons of shows that exist that I didn't even know of. Like, I didn't know that the OA was a show until I watched it, and then because I got told that it was a show worth checking out, and I was like, okay, and I watched it, and I found out it was on years ago, and like, I didn't even know about this. Why didn't I know about this? This isn't a Netflix show, isn't it? There's a large saturation problem. Like, Rachel, you, for instance,
Mm.
watched a show with a creator that is a big sci-fi legend, did Battlestar Galactica, Ronald D. Moore did Outlander.
Yes.
I didn't even know that show existed. And I didn't even know that a sci-fi writing legend was in charge of that show.
Yeah.
Where was it available for us?
Netflix.
Is it a Netflix-produced show, or is it one of those ones where they bought it in for international rights?
They bought it in for international rights,
Mhm.
which also means that you have to, at least for the last couple of seasons, you had to wait quite a while before it would appear on Netflix, which led to me missing a whole season coming out, and I thought that it had been cancelled wrongly, and I was like, oh, okay, there's a whole new season that I guess I haven't watched, because like I jumped off Netflix to watch one season that wasn't on Netflix, and then I saw it come up, and I was like, oh wait, I've watched that season. I was like, wait, how many seasons have I watched?
Availability and knowledge of availability is a major issue that strikes with the sci-fi community of TV, because I actually think there's lots of great sci-fi television happening right now, but you find out about it a season or two later, and then you go, well, I'll wait for it to finish. And the sad thing is, you wait for it to finish, that means that maybe it gets cancelled because nobody's watching it. And that's the thing, is there are things, we're Australians. We don't have all of these streaming services, all these networks. We don't have HBO Max. I can't watch the B5 remasters without having to buy them digitally again.
Buy them digitally, or go.
I have to spend over $100 to get the things I own on DVD.
VPNs do exist, but
no, but we still can't get HBO Max because we still have to have an American credit card, and so that makes it difficult for international viewership as well in a lot of ways. There's shows,
and like I've made it very clear that I think geo-blocking is idiotic and outdated.
Yeah, and the networks that do own sci-fi as their thing, like the Sci-Fi Channel, like the CW, the quality is extremely low, and thus it makes the genre feel
highly variable,
and thus makes the genre feel unreliable. I watched Killjoys, for instance, a Sci-Fi Channel show, 5 seasons long, has an ongoing story arc in it. Would I describe it as good? No. But would I describe it as worth watching? Sure. Because it's trying to do something, but it's not high quality science fiction, it's just okay. It was fun, I had a good time with it, it had stories, it had characters, but would I ever watch it again? No, but it was the best that was on offer at the time. But
that you knew about.
That I knew about. And then there's shows like Ronald D. Moore's at it again with a show called For All Mankind. Where can I get that? Apple TV Plus. Who the fuck has Apple TV Plus? I don't know a single person who does. I didn't even know it existed until I had to look this show up and find where it was on, and then I went, Apple TV Plus.
Oh, you knew from Red Letter Media.
Oh, that's right. Red Letter Media makes fun of it too. And so I think it isn't even a budget thing as well, because Babylon 5 did not need a high budget to communicate its story. So I don't think the budgetary constraints of the genre is necessarily needed if there are people who know how to use the budgetary constraints. JMS did know how to use it. Killjoys did know how to use it. Doctor Who knows it's a cheap show. And they still managed to, it's kind of shit, but they still managed to do science fiction stories and still be one of the most beloved and successful science fiction shows on the landscape. You can make it work.
It takes effort, dedication, and craftsmanship, but you can make it work.
The thing is, there are plenty of great science fiction shows and properties out there. It's just we are forced to investigate to find them.
Yeah, it's a lot of legwork.
It's a lot of legwork. It is a ton of legwork, and that is...
It feels kind of contrarian because we are in a world where so much advertising is delivered to us.
Yes.
So we don't expect to have to go looking for what we want because in so many ways it's delivered to us.
Yeah, and it's just a tough landscape for that genre, but there are good things there. They're just a lot more underdogs. Babylon 5 was an underdog when it came out, and it's sustained as that in a way. Like, us fandoms of B5 love it because it has this underdog quality, a scrappy quality, and managed to get its story done and still managed to not get squashed by Star Trek. And that's a lot of these shows. Rarely are we going to have runaway smash hit sci-fi television shows that aren't something that isn't related to something pre-existing, cause look what CBS does with the Star Trek franchise. Look how much of a fucking domination they have on the advertising of that. I'm not even fucking in America, and I know about Paramount Plus and how much they're trying to make Star Trek this big thing. You know, it's very intimidating, but the sci-fi genre is still strong and still living. In movies, it's very well done at the moment. We've got Denis Villeneuve is doing lots of stuff that's really good, even if it's adaptations of things. We've got podcasts. Audio dramas is where good science fiction is at. Mars Corp, Wolf 359, there's several others I could list off. But sci-fi genre is still strong and alive, but it is being restrained by a lot of these ongoing factors. And one of the things I think is a major issue is marketing. They don't know how to market some of these shows. Like, some of the shows in the defense are too esoteric and hyper-specific. I don't know who I'd recommend the OA to.
Yeah.
I liked it, but I don't know how to pitch that show. Like, I don't know if I could pitch it to you, Rachel. Like,
I watched it and I watched the first 2 seasons and I didn't like it.
The only 2 seasons. And yeah, like, I liked it. I thought it was good. Don't know how to pitch it. B5, at least it's a show when I watched it, I know exactly who I could pitch this to.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the thing too of the marketing doesn't know how to pitch these really esoteric shows, so they go on the wrong track and lose the essence of what would bring in an audience or would bring in a fan base.
I will say, genres need to look different at different times as well. Like, it can't be the same sci-fi as it was in the 90s because, A, that's not how sci-fi works. It's always harping on the political ideologies and issues at the time.
Yeah.
And 2, that would be so fucking boring. And 3, we have these avenues that have opened up, like audio dramas, that have a lower barrier to entry and allow a wider range of creators to get their stories out there.
Yeah. I hope that answers some of the stuff you're asking there, Alan. And again, the irony being, well, there's going to be a B5 show potentially in the future to fill that B5 hole for you, but there are shows out there. It is just, you have to bend over fucking backwards to find them and make concessions on the quality as well. Like, some of them are, it's okay for what it is. There is that level. Like Killjoys, it's good enough. Not great, good enough. So that's my takeaways. Rachel, a pleasure talking all of this exciting, fun news. We'll, of course, be back to regular stuff on all of our feeds, but this is just something we wanted to get out there because people are curious. You can find us on all those social medias: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, Tumblr, TikTok, all of them. We're doing stuff on all of them, so make sure to follow us. Make sure to rate and review us on whatever podcatcher you're on. You have to. This is a demand. This is JMS now speaking. You have to rate and review us on whatever podcatcher you have. That's my JMS voice. Rate and review us on whatever podcatcher you use, if it allows you to do so. This episode of our Thoughts On is a part of a series that we do on our Patreon. So come on over to our Patreon, in which you can hear us dive into our thoughts on other pieces of media, other television shows, other movies, other video games, podcasts, whatever it is. We have a plethora of other content on there. It would be greatly appreciated. See, if you're listening to this on the main feed, you would have been able to hear this a little bit earlier than you're hearing it now. So, come support us on Patreon. It'd be greatly loved, and it would make us feel good. It would make us want to do a reboot of our own podcast within like a 30-year span of time, within that span of time. So, there you go. Rachel, we don't say this at the end of our thoughts on, but, since we're talking about B5...
Good eating to you.
Good eating to you. They better bring that back.
Mystic